Hey there. Welcome to the Gyro Step, a Milwaukee Bucks podcast, proudly a part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network and ESPN, and presented by our pals at Prize Picks. Rohan, we can't do a long, meandering intro like we usually do today because we are joined by a very special guest, Tim MacMahon of ESPN, who covers the NBA there, and of course, just wrote The Wonder Boy, which came out last month in March, less than 1 month ago. Tim, congratulations on the book, and thank you very, very much for joining us here on the Eurostep.
Howdy, partners. I appreciate you having me. Maybe the best podcast name in the NBA.
Yes.
I mean, that's a good one. I like it.
I appreciate that. When neither of us came up with it, and our line is always, if the content ever gets as good as the name, we'll be number one for sure. That's our journey, is to get there. We're going to ask you a bunch of stuff, some NBA stuff, some Bucks stuff, but I want to start with the Wonder Boy, because frankly, when the trade came out, I'm a Hoop Collective listener, avid fan of the show, and one of, not
Despite
one of the first
temps.
things. What?
Despite bomb temps.
Exactly, despite
yeah.
Bond, of course.
Okay, just to be clear.
Yeah. Not one of the very first things, because of course first thing I thought was he was hacked. But actually, before we even get to the book ramifications, how do you find this out? What is this story? And apologies if you've had to tell this 100 times.
Yeah, no.
Did you think someone got hacked?
No, I had gotten to Cleveland a little bit before then. I was coming from San Francisco. The Warriors had 3 games in 4 nights against kind of teams that are in my umbrella. Then I was meeting the Mavericks in Cleveland. So I was fortunate to be in Cleveland. I was tired. It's a long way from San Francisco to Cleveland. You connect in flight. I was about to go to bed. And when I first saw it, my initial thought was, I checked. I'm like, that's really Shams. But my initial thought was, I can't believe they actually did it. Like, I knew they were really frustrated with Luka, but I just was completely flabbergasted. And honestly, then I pretty quickly got to crap the book.
Yeah.
But and then another thought was like, damn, only 1 pick? But I knew how frustrated they were with Luka, the issues with the conditioning. I knew that they blamed him for the repeated calf strains and all those sort of things. But man, this guy just went 34, 10, and 9 last year. Led the league in scoring, led the league in total minutes across regular season and playoffs, and took you to the finals. Typically, those guys are allowed to frustrate you to a pretty high degree. And so there was definitely some shock. And then obviously you get into like, okay, I gotta get into reporting mode. I've got to, contribute to the reporting here, get the reasoning out there. So, I had about 30 minutes of jaw dropping shock, and then, got my ass out of bed and, didn't sleep that night, sprung into action, and, started getting to the bottom of, okay, what exactly happened here? And I'll be honest with you, I thought it was going to be like some explosive, like this thing went down, but it really just was the frustration that had been building up. And, and related to that, the fraying of the relationship between Luka and Nico Harrison, the Mavericks GM, the guy who made this decision. He didn't call for my advice beforehand. I'll put it to you like that.
I think one of the funniest parts of that day was after the initial shock, people being like, "Oh, Tim's got to update the book now. It's it's got to happen."
Well, and I got a lot of like, ha ha ha, that sort of a thing, and I'm like, listen, this is a total inconvenience, and like the early copies of the book don't have the final chapter in there. You've got to go to a website with your proof of purchase and get it emailed to you via PDF. But what a crazy way for the story to end. Just from a storytelling perspective, what an insane plot twist. And then look, I live in Dallas. Mavs fans get mad at me enough. They already think it's gone from you hate the team to you're a puppet. I'm kind of lost in
That's how you know you're doing a good job. We get throughout the year, we are either carrying water for the Bucks or the Bucks' biggest enemy. Sometimes the same people saying both, and that's why I go, okay, we must be somewhere in a good zone in the middle then.
Exactly. Certainly, I've been accused of hating Luka, which I assure you is not the case. We're not like buddies. We never will be, but that's fine.
Yeah.
Obviously admire the guy's talent enough to write 380 some odd pages about him. But from a pure business perspective, like it's not hard to drum up publicity around Luka Doncic's tenure with the Mavericks right now. And, the fact that the Lakers fan base is now a target demographic for a book is not the worst business opportunity for somebody trying to peddle books. It's funny. I've also been accused of like, you're trying to capitalize on him by releasing a book right after. It's like, brother, there was a bunch of books already printed. I had to hustle to make it as current as possible. This thing's been in the works for a few years now.
Yeah, because we all know books get written in a week.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you just knocked it out.
I appreciate the respect for my talent. Oh, you did AI, ChatGPT. No.
It reminds me a lot, actually, of, and probably the last time we did kind of a book club podcast was Mir and Fader wrote the Giannis book, of course, which kind of a similar, almost like you kind of got your ending after it came out. You have to end the book, and then for her it was different, of course, but the championship was after. So now I think the hardcover has that whole section, and for you, of course, the Mavericks chapter just ends on his book. How much does that, I guess, when you look back, and of course you didn't get to totally rewrite it, right? You just kind of have to add on the chapter because of the publishing process. Do you look back and go like, oh, I would have changed more things throughout the book, or did it kind of work as that good book, not good, but fitting bookend of like, this is how it was going, this is where they reached, and then it just ended?
I honestly wouldn't have changed anything except for one phrase. I would have added one phrase. The final chapter ends on this like up. It had to be open ended because it's challenging to write a book on kind of a living, breathing, unfolding story. And so the final chapter was going to have to be open ended until it didn't have to be, and then. But it was upbeat. Like they just went to the finals. The whole premise of the book is about the pressure when you draft a prodigy, to build around this guy, to keep him happy, to prevent the thoughts from creeping in of, man, I might have to go somewhere else to have a chance to really contend for a championship. They had succeeded somehow, despite a bunch of sloppiness, they had succeeded in that mission. So there's a phrase in like the second to last paragraph of what was the final chapter that says something about along the lines of, they had the most treasured commodity in pro basketball, and that's stability with a superstar. I would have, if I could have revised, I would have dash, or so it seemed, but that's the only thing. And like, again, I understand like Luka fans are very loyal people. They are forgiving of his flaws or just fiercely protective. They fall in those two camps. And so I've got a lot of heat over the years on reporting on the flaws, and frankly, primarily on reporting about the conditioning concerns and the weight fluctuations and all those kind of things. And I'm glad that I included all that stuff in the book. I'm glad that I took an honest approach to this generational talent, one of the most talented players we've ever seen in the league, who has imperfections. Because if it would have been just all sunshine and daffodils and rainbows for 18 chapters, and then suddenly, oh, by the way, here's this extra chapter, there was all this concerns all along. And ultimately, they made the shocking, I would say illogical, but decision to trade the guy because of it. But you didn't know anything about it until now. That would have been that would have reflected pretty poorly on the author, I would say. So, all that stuff, like all the conditioning concerns, obviously the petulance with the referees in particular, with Carlisle as his first coach, all that stuff is included in the book. So there's not like me going back and saying, man, I wish I wouldn't have pulled these punches. But saying all like, with all that stuff included, and even knowing how frustrated they were, I was absolutely flabbergasted when this trade was made. Like, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I saw this coming. I was told, like, oh, if we got to do this, if we got to trade, I was told that after Christmas. When they were really frustrated because he's strained his calf again, they're blaming him. Like, this is what happens when you don't take care of yourself. And I rolled my eyes. I was like, okay, because people vent all the time. And people talk tough all the time in the NBA, when they're off the record.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you aren't doing beat. You ain't doing it. You ain't not trading this guy. At the time, he's a 25-year-old, 5-time first-team All-NBA selection who just led your team to the finals. Like, I get you're upset. You're not trading this guy. Give me a break. Well, they did.
Yeah, there was a lot of reporting that came out after the trade, a lot because it was just so shocking. And one of the things that came out was, they asked, maybe it wasn't just the Lakers, maybe they asked a few teams, and one of the big rumored teams was the Bucks. Do you think that there was a Luka Giannis offer on the table from the Mavs?
No, so, and I have confirmed since I wrote the final chapter, so it's not mentioned in the final chapter. It was a very vague and brief conversation with both the Bucks and the Timberwolves. Hey, you think we'd ever consider like a star for star type of trade? And
wow.
John Horst and Tim Connolly with the Bucks and the Wolves are both like, yeah, no, we're good with our guys. Like, we love our guys. And so it wasn't even like, hey, we're looking to trade Luka. We'd like your guy. They weren't to call them discussions or talks would be too much. A very vague, like, could you ever imagine that sort of a thing? Very vague, very brief. Yeah. But Nico Harrison only actually had trade talks and any sort of negotiations. And as far as I know, even specifically mentioned Luka's name only to one team. And that obviously was the Lakers. And, look, part of it is he decided, okay, I'm trading Luka. And if he could have gotten Giannis, sure. And but he wanted his guy, Anthony Davis, right. Who, obviously there's a relationship between AD and Nico that goes back, 15, 16 years now.
Yeah. Well, when it kind of everything comes out in waves now, right? Because, the way the news ecosystem works, like the big news and then like little pieces come out. And when it was like, maybe there were some other teams after we kind of had figured out, like, they didn't want the picks, right? Like they were never calling up OKC and being like Hartenstein and J-Dub and 45 picks. They wanted a guy, they wanted to compete. It's like, okay, I'm assuming they wanted big. So the Ant thing actually kind of surprised me. My thought was, would they call the Grizzlies for Jaren, the Bucks, of course, and would they call the Spurs for Wemby? Which I don't think the Spurs do that ever, or maybe you just don't even call for that reason. But those were kind of the guys that I had thought about.
Right, and look, they didn't call the Rockets, who also have a ton of picks, who have young stars or rising stars. But so to my knowledge, they very lightly touched base with two teams, Minnesota and Milwaukee, and negotiated with only one.
Yeah.
So, and look, that's one of there's a lot of, I think, fair criticism that Nico Harrison has received. There's also been over-the-top things like death threats and racial epithets, but, that's unfortunately guys get that for not hitting parlays in today's league, much less for trading generational talents. But one of the fair criticisms is you did not maximize the return for generational talent. I've said this. I talked to a ton of GMs, scouts, executives, those type of folks. And let's say I talked to 50. So it's somewhere around that number. Probably 42 said you just can't trade that kind of guy without the proverbial gun to your head. And Luka wanted to be in Dallas, despite the relationship frame with Nico. Like, he was committed to Dallas. He was closing on a house. He was signing that Supermax extension this summer. So the vast majority said you just can't trade that guy. There were maybe 8 out of 50 that said, I get wanting to get out of the Luka business, because of the intel that's been out there for a while.
Yeah.
But you have to maximize the return. And by very intentionally keeping it as secretive as possible, to the point where Rob Pelinka was able to say, hey, I can't give you everything. Like, I don't know. Gee whiz, guy might not be happy in L.A. Like, the Lakers have a hard time retaining players. Give me a break. Guys don't like sunshine and playing for the most franchise in NBA history. But you didn't maximize your return. And to me, that's where this fear of the supermax, to me, is very backwards thinking. Because if you want to trade Luka Doncic, you want him locked up on a supermax. You want to be able to put him up. Now, you'd have to wait a year and a half because you can't sign it till the summer, and you can't trade him for a year. So you're going to have to deal with having a generational talent approaching his prime for the next year and a half. Which I know a lot of teams.
Position to be
I know a lot of teams.
Yeah, with your core that just went to the finals. I hate that.
Yeah, a lot of teams would, probably turn on some violin music and try to get through that. But how did Damian Lillard get to Milwaukee? Was Milwaukee the number one team on his list? It was a one-team list. It was MIA, not MIL. Point being, dude, if you want to trade that level of talent, and let's just be straight, like Luka's a completely different level of talent than even Damian Lillard, a first ballot Hall of Famer, than even Anthony Davis, a first ballot Hall of Famer. The best weapon you can have is he's locked up long term. You're keeping it secretive so Bill Duffy, one of the most respected agents in the game, can't get involved, can't influence things. If he's under contract for 4 years, assuming there's a player option, for 4 years, it's like, Bill, hey, we're trading your guy, and we're going to do what's best for our team, and we're going to create the biggest bidding war in NBA history. And this, again, would be summer of 2026, right?
Yeah.
They didn't do that. They wanted to not just dump him, but they wanted to dump him now, and they wanted to get AD in return.
Okay, we will be right back to our very fun interview with ESPN's Tim MacMahon momentarily. Thanks again to Tim for joining the show. But first, a word from our number one sponsor, Prize Picks. It is America's number one daily fantasy sports platform with over 10 million members. Well, you know them. You better love them. They are a huge supporter of the show, and we very much appreciate their support in making the Gyro Step happen. And Rohan, you must appreciate Prize Picks. You had a nice dub on Tuesday.
Oh yeah. So the Bucks were playing the Suns, and like we talked about on our last episode, massive offensive explosion, one of the highest offensive outputs in NBA history. And I don't know why the Bucks have been playing well offensively. I was like, you know what? I can see some good things happening. One thing about Giannis though, sneaky. Let's not make too big of a deal of this. He's making his free throws.
Oh man! Oh boy!
He's making his
4 for
free
10
throws.
against Miami coming up. Way to go!
I know he is making his free throws, but against Phoenix, the projection was 6.5, and I was like, gotta go more. Made 11.
Nice. 11
free throws. You know who else has been balling for the Bucks? It's your guy. It's Ryan Rollins.
Oh yeah.
He's been stepping up in the point guard spot. Projected at 3.5 assists. I was like, what are we doing here? More than 5 assists. Brook Lopez really dominating down low. And I was like, you know what? He's going to get flashbacks to 21. He's going to want to dunk the ball. Projected at half a dunk. Is he going to get a dunk or not? He had 3 in that game time.
A couple oops from Giannis, if I recall correctly.
You are recalling correctly.
Yeah.
And the good thing about the Kevin Durantless Suns is that Devin Booker is still there. So they had a 41.5 projection PRA, points, rebounds, and assists. I was like, yeah, okay, let's calm down here.
Again. We said that on the pod.
We did 53. So that's an easy dub there. I did it as a flex play. I tend to go for a flex play. I could have done it as a power play.
Well, a win is a win, and we love winning on Prize Picks. It's extremely fun. In addition to pro basketball and all of these plays we just talked about with Giannis and others, of course, collegiate basketball and baseball now in full swing, get it, as well. So download the Prize Picks app today. Use code Eurostep to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That is win or lose, folks, the deal of a century. So support the pod. Please go download the Prize Picks app today. Use that promo code Eurostep. Again, $50 instantly when you play $5 lineup for the first time. Prize Picks, run your game. Now back to Ben MacMahon. The wildest trade ever. I mean, it's people looks like, maybe the Kareem trade or have thrown out other trades. But again, to your point, whenever it's a player like that at that kind of age, it's the player says, "Hey, I'm going."
Yep.
And then you recoup what you can, right? The Bucks get their picks and Frank Winters and whatever, but he wanted to go to LA. They made it happen out of respect. Hopefully this scenario doesn't repeat for the Bucks in the near future, which we'll get into a little bit. But definitely everyone go by the Wonder Boy. We now have to talk Bucks a bit, which you can tell we were glad to do something else given the way that they have played recently. But definitely go get the book wherever you get your books. It is a fantastic read, and there are Bucks connections. I know there's a Giannis mention early on, and there's so many crossing lines here with kind of the Bucks and this whole situation, including the potential for swapping those players, which of course did not come about.
I mean, the Bucks have been living with this pressure for a long, long time. Right.
Yeah.
And like I said, the whole book the premise is the pressure on a franchise when you draft a prodigy. And it's written through the prism of Luka and the Mavericks. And, there's been a bunch of drama, dysfunction, and twists and turns, but it's written through that prism. But the Bucks have been living in that world for a long time, to the point where the Mavericks drafted 3 players in Luka's class. The first 2, right? Obviously, Luka, Jalen Brunson. Ended up being pretty damn good. Do you know the third?
Oh, yeah, I think I do. Yeah, pretty close to home. It's Costas, right?
Yeah. Giannis Antetokounmpo. Now, why would they draft that guy with the 60th overall pick? Had a okay freshman year at Dayton.
Yeah.
Why would they? Because they're trying to create a relationship with the family. Now, why would they do that? Because the Mavericks, like many other teams in the league, were lining up to be Giannis's preferred destination when he asked for a trade. And so this is going all the way back to the 2018 draft. We are years down the road. We are and the Drew Holiday trade came soon after that. That secured Giannis's commitment, brought a championship to Milwaukee. Then the Dame Lillard trade hadn't secured the championship, but at least secured another extension for Giannis. Bucks fans can relate to that kind of pressure probably as much as anybody. It's just that they have successfully managed to keep Giannis in Milwaukee for however long it is. And by the way, Luka is the guy who Donnie Nelson pounded the table for the hardest since maybe ever, but the last guy that he really pounded the table hard for in the draft room was Giannis. And that's obviously when Giannis was a skinny, like kind of mysterious, like, do we have any better footage than this? 6'9", 190-pound guy. But that's the year the Mavericks had the 13th pick in the draft. But Cuban was like, no, we're going to be able to sign Dwight Howard. We got to save some cap space. So they trade down from 13, despite Donnie Nelson's saying, dude, this guy's going to be the best player in the draft. We should draft him. 13 to 16 to 18. And obviously, you guys know Giannis went 15, and it's worked out pretty well for the Bucks.
Yeah, after the Hawks tried to keep him hidden in their facility. And so that draft has so many wild stories. You mentioned they get Dame. This whole era, it's, the hype was, of course, probably now definitely out of control looking back, and it's not lived up to it. Some of that obviously is just due to injuries, and they're back here again with Dame's situation. But I know you kind of had talked to Giannis a couple of weeks ago, kind of asking about just their partnership, which of course everyone wants to see the pick and roll be just so dominant. They don't go to it that often, and it's not been the smoothest when they play together.
Yeah.
The results have been I'd say good but not great most of the time. And this year, barely even good. And I know Giannis pushed back as Giannis does with the media and, who's leading the league in duo scoring or whatever it was. But, first off, what's it like to kind of deal with Giannis when he's, doing these little, we say he's willfully misleading sometimes with the media.
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts on the partnership?
And so, just to be clear, I primarily focus on the Western Conference, but I see teams. I'm based in Dallas, so I see teams when they come through Dallas, and depending on the night, I might go in and focus on the visiting team, and this was one of those nights. And Giannis and Dame cooked that night, and this was when the Bucks they were in a nice little rhythm. They were on a pretty nice little roll. It's funny. I went in, and I wasn't asking a fastball type of question. I kind of lofted up a softball just about, hey, how have you seen the chemistry between you guys kind of continue to improve. And that's what he said. He said, I might not, I don't think I follow the NBA as closely as maybe I should, but are we the highest scoring duo in the NBA? And he kind of looks around. Oh, gee whiz. Yeah, we sure are, and so that sort of a thing. And I'll be honest with you, like, I don't see the Bucks often, but I always have enjoyed Giannis. He is very accessible by superstar standards. He's very insightful. He can be very disingenuous, but I find it to be pretty entertaining. And he's a hell of a player. I mean, he's a hell of a player. And honestly, like, I enjoy the personality, despite the fact that, there's an occasional tinge of full of bleakness in there. So I was a little taken aback. Like, and I asked Eric Name afterwards. I was like, "Hey, is Giannis like real sensitive about like this duo thing?" And he kind of explained, like, just because I think the expectations were so high. And by the way, I was one of those people who I saw Dame, like one of the best pick and roll operators in the league, a guy who obviously can legitimately stretch defenses out off of pick and roll to 35 feet, like can pull up on the logo off of pick and roll. And I'm thinking, you have that. You have Giannis as a roller who obviously won just the lob threat and all that. But boy, you get Giannis the ball, you run pick and roll that high, get him the ball 4-on-3 downhill, in the middle of the court. And I thought it was a match made in heaven. And it just, it's two guys that are used to being 1A. And there's kind of been a process of figuring that out. And then I shouldn't have underestimated just what a drastic drop off and how impactful the drop off would be defensively. I mean, Jrue Holiday is him, Lou Dort, probably the two best on ball defenders in the league. Defense has not ever been Dame's strength, to put it politely. Yeah. And so I underestimated that draw. And then obviously there's been messiness with, the coaching situation and all those sort of things and a lot of other stuff that happened. So when they made that trade, I thought the Bucks were going to be the best team in the NBA last year. Instead, they got a 30-13 coach fired, and then got worse after that. And then this year, they're a pretty good team, but they're a long way from being in that contender tier. And then unfortunately, Dame's now dealing with a blood clot where there's a lot of uncertainty there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a weird couple of years. Like you mentioned, like, it's a match made in heaven. Theoretically, he was probably the best attainable fit you could ever pair with Giannis. I'd say he's probably the third best theoretical fit before we actually saw it, behind Steph and Luka, I'd say, to match up with Giannis. But the most attainable out of those three. I mean, maybe not. We saw what happened with Luka.
I was going to say, none of those three guys are going to get traded, right?
But we never saw a playoff game with Giannis, Dame, and Chris. We are probably not going to see another. I mean, who knows? But we're probably not going to see another playoffs without Giannis and Dame playing a playoff game together. Like we're still waiting to see that happen. Yeah. So if we see another weird flame out in the offseason, the Bucks are a team that don't like to stay complacent. They like to sort of shake things up. They like to make drastic changes when they see that nothing is going well. So they have a couple options. One, they can move on from like the front office sort of positions like John Horst and that crew. They could make another coaching change. Why not have 4 coaches on your payroll? Why not
try to keep up with Ishbia?
Hey, no luxury tax on coaches, as I told folks in Phoenix when I went through there recently.
Yeah, 100%. But there's also like, you can shake up the roster. There's a lot of options. I am very confident that the Bucks are not going to do anything special in this postseason. Maybe I'm a doomer, but maybe I'm just seeing reality. What do you think is?
I think that's a fair bet. Look, they're always going to have a chance because at least I would say in every series in the Eastern Conference, they'll have the best player. So you're always going to have a chance, but it's like, seeing is believing, and they have not shown us that they should be considered contenders. And that's before, Dame's unfortunate health situation.
100%. So let me ask you this way: what do you think would be more likely, like a Like a major player shakeup or like a organizational shakeup?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I would just be guessing on that, and I try not to guess on people's jobs, on job security. But those are you're asking questions that are being asked around the league. But I don't have a good enough feel to speak with any sort of confidence on which one's more likely. Look, obviously, John Horst has all in all done a hell of a job there. He's been operating under this immense pressure. He did make the moves that helped deliver a championship to Milwaukee. Now, having Giannis on the roster is a hell of a starting point, but without that Jrue Holiday trade, they never get to the top of the mountain. And then there's been a lot of misfortune since then. That's just part of it. So if he ends up, not being back next year, he will certainly leave Milwaukee with his head held high after a hell of a run. But the biggest question everybody's asking around the league about the Bucks is the one that they've been asking now for 7 or 8 years. Hey,
going back to at least 2017 with that Costas pick, what Miami and Toronto were trying to do around then. It's been a long time.
Yeah. Hey, is Giannis going to finally? Is he going to finally ask out? I mean, but again, that's been the question, the biggest question around the Bucks for almost a decade now, and it hasn't happened yet. It's a tough situation. If they are a first round exit, it's a tough situation because they're like Giannis is at worst the 4th best player in the league. Like there's only 3 other guys that are in the conversation. 2 dudes who are going to finish 1-2 in MVP. I think Giannis finishes 3rd, and then Luka's not had that kind of year this year, but I think you put Luka in that conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to ask, quickly here. The league has been, I guess, kind of wish casting this for a long time, as we've discussed, right? Obviously, that's going around again now. Every time they struggle, that's going to happen. Does it feel any different from past years? Does it feel like more palpable, or is it just kind of like, is the sense like we don't know, but we think maybe, and we want to be ready?
And I know Giannis has been very sensitive about describing a year as a failure.
Yep.
But a
lot of steps to success lately.
yeah, right. Exactly. I feel like it might be a treadmill where you're running in place. Every year where a reasonable person would describe the situation as a failure, given that you've got one of the best players in NBA history in his prime leading the roster, it's like there's a reason that these teams are plotting and planning and trying to position themselves to strike here. And it's not just because they think that Giannis will wake up on the wrong side of the bed. It's kind of forecasting, and Giannis is the only person who really knows how realistic that might be. But every year that it's a first round exit, you got to at least consider it to be a reasonable possibility. And as those stack up, it's a tough spot to be in.
Yeah, it really is. I can say from our perspective, I think this is the first time probably ever that it's probably felt real.
Well, and I would say the 2 times before that it's felt real, they were able to take massive swings in the trade market. The Jrue Holiday trade, okay, hey, boom, I'm good. Let's sign that thing. Off we go. And then the Dame trade, Giannis responded the same way. I think it was a little bit more of a delay until he put pen to paper in that case. But, so is there another one of those type of deals that the Bucks can pull off? And it gets tougher and tougher to do. Because you're still paying off, you still got stuff on your credit card from the previous deals.
Yeah. I don't think we're going to see the Luka, let's get out from under this guy now and start the rebuild. There's been some super doomer fans who are like, how much could you get from OKC if I think the reaction would be the same. So even though the Bucks are not in as long-term of a situation, I think Milwaukee would rightfully riot.
I cannot imagine. I just and listen, I could not imagine the Mavericks doing it either. But just to be clear, I cannot imagine that the Bucks would ever, ever, ever even consider trading Giannis unless he was pushing for it. And I've talked to people with the Bucks organization. They absolutely, positively are determined to compete with Giannis as the franchise centerpiece for as long as possible. And if that's his entire career, they would be ecstatic about that situation. So no. And the thing is, listen, even if Giannis does end up asking for a trade, he's still freaking Giannis. They're still going to get a haul.
Yeah.
Still going, and I don't, the thing that would really, really surprise me is if it became a contentious situation. And again, I don't know Giannis extremely well, but what I know of him, what I know of the partnership that they've had now for well over a decade, I would be surprised, even if he got to a point where he felt like, hey, it's time to go, I would be surprised if it ever became like a real contentious situation. He might have a short list, but I think he would at least allow the Bucks front office to hold real conversations, within that list. And look, a talent like that, still in his prime, is still putting up historically spectacular numbers. You're not going to be left with nothing if Giannis asks out. That's for sure. You're going to enter into obviously a different chapter in Bucks history, and in those type of situations, likely a rebuild. But I think Oklahoma City's evidence that a rebuild done well can pay great dividends down the road.
Yeah, just find the next Shea.
But you know what though? Even Houston, and Houston does, and this is one of the stories I'm working on. The Rockets are a star away, a legitimate superstar away from being a real deal championship contender. They're going to be the 2 seed in the West. They're not a real contender though, and honestly, they know that. But so their question is that star going to be homegrown, or do they need to take a big swing in the trade market? Wouldn't be a bad team to, if it got to the point with Giannis, that would be a bad team to call, by the way. But in trading James Harden, they got a ton of picks, and then they've been able to parlay those picks into more picks and better picks. And here they are. It was 3 ugly years, and then a 500 year, and now they're the 2nd seed in the Western Conference. So you don't necessarily have to get back an MVP candidate in the return to have a good rebuild.
It helps, but no, there's other ways to do it.
I would recommend it if possible.
Yeah, more teams should opt to do that.
Yes,
I think
exactly. Just go to the future MVP store every time.
Yeah, pick one up.
Is that just the Clippers? Are they just going to keep on doing that forever?
I don't know if they've got one right now. Not a future. I mean, you never know. But yeah.
We shall see.
Yeah, they. I don't know if
I'm a big Chris Dunn guy, but I don't know if that leap is in him.
Yeah, number one on Dice free agent board.
Yeah,
I wouldn't describe the Clippers as loaded with young talent.
No.
Not a team you want to necessarily run into in the first round, though.
No, they are. Yeah. I mean, everyone in the West. I mean, it's like the East play-in is, the Teletubbies, and then the West play-in is kind of a war in the whole first round. I mean, I can't wait for the playoffs. Hopefully the Bucks, have a solid, maybe get to the second round this year. That'd be great. But it's looking forward to be a tremendous year going forward, for the NBA, for the West, definitely, as well as getting the book. Everyone should go follow Tim here at ESPN_McMahon on Twitter. If you're not already, he's called Ban McMahon, but you're not banned from following him. So go do that. A lot of great Western Conference and more coverage coming down the pipe. But Tim, thank you again for joining us here on the Gyro Step. We really appreciate your time.
Really appreciate you guys having me, and adios amigos.
All right, Rohan. That was our convo with Tim MacMahon again. Thank you very much to Tim for taking the time. Very gracious with his time in a busy time of year as the playoffs draw near and as he promotes a book with probably, perhaps bigger audiences. I'm seeing him on a lot of big time shows, but maybe audiences that are more into Luka. But I do think we have a lot of smart basketball fans. And again, as we kind of joked about earlier in the pod, maybe a lot of listeners who are ready to tune out of the Bucks for a little bit and laugh at or learn more about another franchise. What were your big takeaways from the convo, Rohan?
I think one, you hit it right there. It's nice to talk about something other than the Bucks for a second. It's nice to hear about like the inner workings of things that go on like this. Hear the perspective of a guy who's really tuned in to these sort of things, and it's fun hearing how shocked he was as we are.
Yeah,
it's not like this is something that's been bubbling. It's nice to hear like he'd heard some bubbling things about like how much Luka in the front office wasn't really a big fan of Luka. I don't think that was a big thing that's just been out there, and how that's been brewing for a kind of a bit. So that was fun to hear. But just the shock and awe of someone as plugged in as Tim just having the same reaction as us makes me feel a little better.
Well, how about, I love that. I talked to 50 executives. 42 thought it was stupid, and the other 8 thought it was stupid for a different reason. He didn't ever say that verbatim, but that was one of my favorite parts. I was going to say, okay, almost 20% saw the vision. Oh, okay. But no, they would have done it differently, but they still would have done it. I had some jealousy. We should put in decades of work reporting on the NBA too. It seems, pretty simple, straightforward what Tim did there to get to his current spot, because to have in some of the conversations he talked about with like the NBA sources, like that would be so just enlightening of like, the Mavs were like, oh, we're sick of him, we're going to trade him. And he's just like, no, you're not. Like, imagine just like these kind of combos. Any league sources listening, shoot one of us a DM, and we would gladly go back and forth and share whatever is permissible on the show and on Twitter here. But I know it's reporting. It's a lot more than that. No offense.
We're joking.
Reporters out there. We're trying to shortcut the process. We're too busy podcasting to do the real work. But yeah, I think some of those tidbits were so interesting. Things that don't necessarily get reported, but the actual ins and outs of like getting this info and talking to like canvassing the league and stuff like that.
Yeah, 100%. I also thought it was really cool to hear like sort of an outside perspective of like the whole Giannis situation as well. Yeah. And he's like, I think I seemed more pessimistic than he did.
Yeah.
Which is weird. That's not usually where I'm at.
You've become a doomer.
Yeah, I don't like it.
I do. I think the league has actually, and I know Bucks fans don't believe this. I think the league at large has kind of just given up on crying him out.
Yeah.
It's kind of like if it happens, it happens.
Tim MacMahon is a guy who covers the entire NBA for ESPN.
Yes.
And I was more pessimistic than him.
Yes. Well, again, I think it's just been so long, and he's just re-signed so many times that everyone's like, you know what? Call me when he asks out. Like, I was thinking about this in previous days. We talked about like the Rockets have a treasure trove. Obviously, OKC does too. If they win the title, I don't think they would trade for Giannis, personally. You never know, but they strike me as a pretty cautious org. If they lose the title, I think they're definitely in play. If it happens, again, they're not just, the Bucks won't just do it. That was great to hear from Tim too. But I feel like there's not a ton of teams that like have their big treasure trove of assets ready and waiting to get a big star.
No, there really isn't.
It's I think a lot of teams kind of gave up on like this idea of like, oh, we'll just go trade for the guy. And most teams are like, let's just try and be good instead.
Probably the only team that is in a space to do it is the Spurs. Because it's like they're still a building team and they have a bunch of assets.
Yeah, I keep forgetting the Spurs.
But that's like it. Like a lot of people want to say Brooklyn, right? Because they have assets and things like that to be able to trade. They have picks, sorry, I should say. But that's the thing. They have picks. They don't have like great young talent or anything like that.
Well, the thing about it too.
No disrespect. Actually, no, I'm disrespecting Nick Claxton here.
Yeah, I mean,
Noah Clowney, I'm sorry. I think he just got hurt. I shouldn't say him.
Well, it's okay. He presumably.
I think I say that because I think I watched him get hurt.
Oh yeah, he fell like that. Oh no, that was whatever. Also, something Tim said is like they'll probably work together on this. In what world is Giannis? Like, I'd still think if he ever leaves, I think he leaves because he looks at another situation and goes, even after they trade for me, they give up stuff, I have a better chance to win there. And in what world is he like? Let's say the Nets win the lottery. And they have to give up everything else but Cooper Flag, all the picks and their whatever players that are not appealing. In what world does Giannis go like, yeah, me, Cooper Flag, and cap space in this weird year? That's a contender worth leaving the Bucks for. I don't see it.
That's the thing. It's not a thing. If Giannis is ever going to leave, and I hate having these conversations, by the way, but like it's worth having. Is like he's doing it to win. He's not doing it for anything else.
100%.
So it's a good point you make. He's not going to Brooklyn just saying, hey, me and this rookie who, by the way, if the Bucks are trading Giannis to the Nets, you do it for Cooper Flag.
That also that. Yeah.
You do it for Cooper Flag and nothing else.
Yeah.
He's not doing
that.
Would the Bucks do that?
Yeah. No, does Brooklyn do that?
No, I think Brooklyn does do that.
So
actually, I don't know.
I mean, I don't think James Harden's going to go back and sign with the Brooklyn Nets, no matter what, or to play with Giannis. He's probably the best available free agent.
Yeah.
What's the plan?
Technically, Chris can be.
We got Giannis, Cam Johnson, Nick Claxton. That's our team.
Yeah, that doesn't make any
Chris
sense.
back. I think it's got to be a team that's pretty damn good now. So the Spurs, even I'm like maybe they're a little too early, but play with Wemby, play with Fox. I guess if he stays as well, Castle. Maybe Castle goes back.
Yeah, you would ask for Castle.
Yeah, I mean, I think
yeah,
it's Giannis. You don't play this like Luka. OKC makes too much sense. Houston, I'm not totally sure about.
Yeah, I think it's just because I'm not sold on their young talent.
I think you want a men. You want a men, and then you probably get Jabari and Reed Shepherd or something.
Yeah,
and a bunch of picks.
Yeah, but
I don't know. There's not a clean one out there to me.
No, it's not. There isn't, and I don't know. I think that kind of makes me feel better.
Yeah, I mean, people say the Lakers now will play with Luka, but they kept one pick. That they don't have this stuff.
Who are they trading?
Austin Reeves and one pick and Rui Hachimura. Just no way, man.
That's when the riots happened.
Yeah, I mean, I know the Bucks were happy taking a mediocre-ish white guy and some other stuff for Kareem. I think the fan base has evolved a little bit since then. Austin Reeves is better than Frank Winters, I would say, but still. Not the centerpiece of a Giannis package.
R.I.P. Junior Bridgman. But
I know they got Junior Bridgman as
well. Just want to make sure he's respected.
That's a good call. I was not talking about him, to be clear.
No, he is.
That should have been obvious, but in case anyone thought I was very confused, was not talking about Junior Bridgman.
I don't know. KD doesn't make any sense.
No, the Suns are their cap is still so messed up that they can't really.
Yeah, but it's what other options are there? So it's probably not a this summer thing.
I thought the Warriors, if they didn't get Jimmy, but I think they kind of now put themselves out of it.
Yeah, especially with that Jimmy extension.
A lot of teams did that. I mean, again, the Lakers, if they wanted him, I guess it would have been the Luka package and more, but I don't think
maybe
the Bucks
it's
still probably. Yeah, I don't think they're doing that. I think they're pretty happy with Luka. Oh, he's not playing great, but no, that's not. So that's what I mean. So it should, I think, actually be optimistic because I don't think you look at the landscape and see a ton of teams that are really well. The Celtics, I don't think so. The Cavs, I don't think so. I think you'd really like to not trade in division. I'll tell you my darkest dark horse, and I still don't really think it makes sense.
The Bulls?
Just the Pistons give you everything but Cade.
What does that do for you?
That'd be not much.
Yeah, because
again,
the driving engine. Calling. I know the driving engine of that team is Cade.
Right. Yeah. They need a second guy that they don't have.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Bledsoe Bucks, where it's just Giannis and Chris are doing everything.
Yeah.
Except it's just Giannis. Sorry, just Cade in that scenario.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, things could change by then. You never know. But I do feel like there's not many teams that make a lot of sense. So
Scotty isn't as big of a commodity as he was.
Oh, you mean the Raptors?
Yeah.
The Raptors, but they've given away some picks. They have a lot of solid youngish guys, but I don't think they're.
But again, it's the Brooklyn situation. How is that a better place to win?
Right, they're bad.
Memphis
for Ja is intriguing.
But then it's Giannis, Jaren. I know Jaren
Giannis
likes
and Jaren kind of.
Yeah, it's it's better than Giannis Brooke.
Yeah, Memphis might be one.
But then who's your guard? You're relying
Bane.
a lot. I was gonna say, are you relying on Bane to do a lot? I don't know if that's
trade for someone else.
Yeah,
Memphis is a good shout. Also, a team that's going to do stuff, and there's also Ja Smoke.
Yeah. Also, they need a coach.
Yes.
It's Doc Rivers.
Bud might be available.
Doc might be available.
That's enough of this. I don't
this is
talk about this anymore.
You can do a whole pot of this
anymore. Yeah, well, hopefully we don't have to.
I'm glad the Tim stuff's up front.
Exactly. The gears were just turning after our conversation there. But
it's very intriguing. And once again, thank you to Tim MacMahon for joining. Yes. And make sure you go buy The Wonder Boy. It's a great read. Everyone should check it out. Basketball fans get to see this story about the pressure that kind of just morphs into a tragedy.
It's going to be, hopefully that part's not relatable, but the pressure part will be relatable to Bucks fans.
100%. A lot of ties there. But yeah, make sure you check it out. Thank you to Tim. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you're listening to or watching this podcast. Oh, wow, I lost my train of thought. Make sure you check out gspn.info for all things GSPN. You can subscribe and get a commercial-free version of this podcast, exclusive GSPN After Dark pod, written content, all that fun stuff. $8 a month. Supports the team. But yeah, make sure you're subscribed. Pod random. And we'll talk to you next time.